Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of This is HCD. My name is Jerry Scullion and I'm the founder of the Human Centered Design Network, and I'm delighted to have you with me because today on the show we have someone who's very special and somebody whose work I absolutely adore, and that's Jessica Hische. Now, Jessica Hische is a renowned lettering artist based in San Francisco, and they're an author celebrated for their exquisite typography and eloquent visual storytelling. Now, her work is breathtaking. I don't know how many other words I can use to describe their work, and I have several pieces dotted around my own home here. But most recently, we have several of Jessica's children books. Tomorrow I'll Be Brave, and Tomorrow I Will Be Kind. Now, we chat about the process and the tensions in their work and how they balance the two roles of one being a writer and the other one being an illustrator, and how they actually kind of balance that out. Now, I'm going to throw a link to their work in the show notes and a description if you're on YouTube, but their work is really stunning. And this is a great episode to get into the mind of somebody who is absolutely nailing it in the design world. Let's get straight into it. Jessica Hische, I am delighted to welcome you to the Human Centered Design Podcast. Long-time fan, first-time speaker, but for people who've been living under a rock and haven't come across your name somewhere in the design world, maybe we'll start off by telling them a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do.
Totally. So I never assume anyone knows who I am. That's something too.
Especially, they should do.
I've been at this for so long now, though, that now there's young people that learn way more about the people who are 3 stages removed from me than they would about me. So I don't make that assumption.
No, but your anyway, work is yeah.
I grew up in Pennsylvania, which is a state here in the United States, and I was born to 2 parents who were not creatives, but who let me be creative, which was pretty cool. And then I ended up, by the skin of my teeth, going to college and studying graphic design. Thought I was going to be a painter, but ended up a graphic design major. And part of that was just I really loved working towards solving problems rather than doing it as a self-expression thing all the time. I felt like at the time I didn't really have anything to express yet. And I still find now that I feel the most creative when there's a problem to solve or when I have a bunch of constraints, not when there's this sort of open-ended, do whatever you want brief. I kind of hate those. And so after school, I realized that I kind of wanted to be an illustrator more than anything, because I always loved drawing and painting growing up, but didn't really know how to commercialize it or turn it into a real job. And then after I graduated, I was like, oh wait, that's a whole profession of doing drawing and painting for other people that pay you to do it. And so I was trying to pursue that in a freelance capacity, but ended up getting a job as a graphic designer working for this really legendary lady in New York, Louise Feely. And she was just a great mentor, and I learned a lot about typography. I learned a lot while in college, but also on the job, and then took a post-grad type design course and all kinds of stuff. But when I finally went on my own as a freelancer, I didn't want to leave the typography behind, even though I still had this dream of being an illustrator. So I was illustrating typography as my thing. And at the time, lettering wasn't really as much of a profession. Yeah, it had a big moment in the 80s and 90s, but then once people could find fun display fonts on their personal computers, it kind of died down quite a bit. And I felt like I was really in this first new big wave of people embracing it again, and I was just screaming it from the rooftops. And so now lettering has become this massive profession again. Who knows, maybe people will get tired of it and it'll go away again. but I feel like part of that was me and a handful of my peers just constantly shouting about it and, being really early on in the trend for that. And so I've been on my own freelancing or running my own studio since 2009. And I work for all kinds of clients. I do stuff for film, for books, for ad campaigns, for logos, all sorts of things. And then once I became a parent, I started doing illustrating and writing kids' books as well. And so that's sort of the biggest arc.
That is you're too humble for a start, because like you said, do a bit of movies, do a bit of this. Like, you've done some serious work over the last 15, 16, 17 years, whatever it is. I'm not great at maths. But for anyone who's still kind of wondering, like, do they know any of the work? I'm going to put a link into the show notes straight away, so you can click down below if you're listening to this on Spotify, or if you're watching it on YouTube, it's in the description box. Click on. You'll definitely follow along with this conversation as we're kind of learning more about Jess's background. You touched on something there at the very end, Jessica, where you mentioned about becoming a parent and writing a book for the first time. Like, in the podcast, This is HCD, we really kind of speak to an audience around change makers, people who want to make the world a better place, who are kind of in that mindset of doing good. And I think we've a couple of prints floating around my home here. And my wife is a big fan of the positivity that sort of comes through in your work. Like, I think there's one about sleeves up. Sleeves up, I can't remember what it's called, but hard work and all this kind of stuff. So you've got some of these seedlings that have happened even before you became a parent. And it's like the first book. When was that written? What was that called again? Tomorrow I'll be
That one's
cold?
Tomorrow I'll Be Brave.
Which one? Tomorrow I'll be
Tomorrow
brave.
I'll
We've
Be
got two
Brave.
of these
Yeah.
books in this. Tomorrow I'll be brave. So tell us a little bit about the background to this book. Like, you had your first child, and what happened?
Well, for one thing, I'm sure you probably have a fair amount of parents in your audience also.
Yeah.
If you are a creative person and then become a parent, you become this like idea factory, like no matter what, where you just see all the things around you and you go, oh my God, this playmat is so ugly and horrifying. If only I could start a company making beautiful design playmats, and you
Yeah.
just see opportunity at every turn. And I think as an illustrator, and also someone who enjoys writing and things too, I was reading so many kids' books, because it's just a part of your routine from even when you have an infant. It's just a way to center a moment with your child where you're not just like goo goo guying at them. You're, intentionally showing them stuff and reading them stuff. And I realized I had wanted to illustrate or write a kid's book before, but I didn't really know what the right moment was. And I sort of felt this weird silent gatekeep around it, which didn't actually exist. I felt like there was this
Mm.
like, oh, I'm not allowed to do that. People like devote their lives to that and they understand it and all this kind of stuff. But then as my kids would fall in love with random books, I was just like, I don't like this
Mm.
book, but you do you. It made me realize that there's just like an unlimited need for children's books, because even if your kid is like into this really specific thing, like my kid likes dinosaur trucks or whatever, like if you don't have like 20
Yeah.
books about dinosaur trucks, you're just reading like one dinosaur truck book over and over and over and over and over again. And so
Yeah.
it makes it so all of a sudden
True.
this like bar to entry feels quite low, where you're like, all I need to do is find a thing that I know I wish was expanded upon, or like has a different spin on it, or it's within this universe that my kid likes or whatever. And so for me, I had been in therapy for a few years and had felt like I learned all these really basic feeling tools that were really hard to learn, as an adult. And when you say
Yeah.
them, it seems so simple, but trying to actually put them into practice is the difficult thing. And I wanted to sort of like take these lessons that I was learning and teach them to my younger self. My younger self was like existing here in the world as my child. I was just like, oh my God, you are like
Yeah.
me being able to take care of my child self by giving you the resources
Yeah.
that
I
I
get
didn't
that.
have. And so Tomorrow I'll Be Brave is all about like I just noticed that there were a ton of books about like you can be anything, you can be president, you can be an astronaut, like
Yeah.
whatever, but not a ton of books that talked about what happened when you don't achieve your goals, and like that it's totally
Mm.
okay and that you can't be everything at once, but it shouldn't stop you from like trying to be different things and sort of like feeling out yourself per day and being like, what am I capable of today? And like letting yourself do the
Mm.
thing that feels like you can have the most impact in that moment versus trying to like climb some artificial ladder or trying to like do everything all at once. Like we're never going to be capable of doing that. And just sort of like in teaching that like you might have all these goals, but you're not going to be able to do it all at one time. So like just celebrate the
100%.
things that you were able to do instead of getting yourself all down on the things you weren't, you know?
Yeah. So that first book came out probably 6 years ago. Is it around that
Yeah,
time?
I think it came out
Is it
in
that long?
20, I want to
5 or
say
6?
2018, 2017 or 2018.
It was before the pandemic. I remember that. I know that because we were reading it during the pandemic. Um, so what was the journey like where you decided this was something you were going to pursue? How do you prototype something like this? How do
Well,
you were
at
you
first
using your
I was gonna say, at first I thought I was gonna self-publish it. And so I was on
okay,
this big hot kick about how I was gonna self-publish it. And so I tried to hold myself accountable to that by talking about it in public at conferences. And
mm,
so I
yeah,
wrote the manuscripts to both Tomorrow I'll Be Brave and Tomorrow I'll Be Kind. And then I illustrated like two spreads of them. And then I went on stage at a conference and was like, I'm writing a kid's book and I'm going to release it. And then I just completely lost steam, and sort of needed the
no
accountability
way,
of a publisher. So I ended up deciding that one, I wanted the accountability of working with other people, but also I knew that I wanted the book to have an audience that was wider than just designers and other creative people because it's
sure,
for any kid, it's not just for creative kids. And so
yeah,
I ended up pitching it to 7 different publishers and got offers from a few of them and then went with Penguin
hmm,
for it. And yeah, and then they helped me put the
absolutely.
book into the world.
So, as regards using your kids as prototypes, was that something that you did as regards
Oh, yeah, but they
telling
hated
the
it.
story and
They
how
they were like, "This is
what?
boring. This book is for babies," you know? But I think it's just because I
Oh,
was so, like, eager to, like, get their feedback. They were just like, "Get out of here, mom. I wanna read my book about this boy who imagines a rocket," or whatever.
it's yeah, it's funny because I don't know if you ever heard of the author Roddy Doyle. He's an Irish author. He wrote movies like The Commitments, The
Mhm.
Van, some amazing movies. Like they really captured Ireland in the early '90s. He's an extremely celebrated author in this country. But anyway, Roddy he wrote books for his own kids, and he never intended to publish them. One of them is called The Gigglers, which is about these little monsters who go about playing pranks on adults, who are kind of mean and kind of say mean things to other people and to children. And it wasn't until a few years after that the books got published. So he used his children as kind of like the first readers, and it's gone on now. We've seen it as a theater production there just before Christmas. So it seems to be a thing where creative people have kids, and it kind of, as you said, they become idea factories where they're just like, wow, this would be so cool to do this. I'm surprised your kids didn't like it, but do they
They were
like it
just
now? Now
I
the fact
think
that mum has got like four of them.
they're very proud of me. And they love
Yeah.
like talking about how their mom is her own boss and blah 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 and like writes books. And they love that. But my daughter has always been like my daughter especially, she's always like
How old is she
years
now?
past what she's supposed to be. She's 8.5 now, almost 9. And so she
She's
was
driving a
in
car, is she?
I mean, basically. She last year when she was in 2nd grade, she was reading at like a 5th or 6th grade level. And so when she first
Right.
started reading, she like immediately went from like basic like ABC whatever books to like graphic novels. So she just like bypassed picture books entirely. And so she just felt like my
Yeah.
books were like too simple and not like complicated enough for her, even when she was little. My youngest,
Well,
however, he's into it. He was really into Tomorrow I'll Be Kind for a while. That was like his fave. And then my third book, Who Will You Be? He really liked that one as well. And then he's like a super fan of my new book that's coming out. Actually, all the kids really like my new book. So I feel like that one's gonna going to do well, because it's
Yeah.
like definitely not a book that's meant to please a 9-year-old, but my almost 9-year-old is like, this is pretty fun. I like this one. So
Okay. How are you finding the writing aspect? Because obviously the illustration, I remember when I saw that book coming out, I was like, okay, at that stage I was a new dad, and I was like, okay, fan of the lettering, the illustration work. I bought it primarily for me. It looks cool. I'm a designer. I like seeing the designery books. It matches. It looks great on the bookshelf, and it's cool. So, how did you find the writing aspect of the narrative? Because as you alluded to before, you're like, oh, somebody else does all that. Maybe I shouldn't be doing. Maybe I'm not good enough to write these kind of things. But you've proven yourself wrong. You have been able to write, and you've wrote a number of them. What was that journey like in terms of getting the narrative down?
well, I don't have a very good writing process. So writing, I consider myself to be a pretty good
Mm,
writer, but I just don't have a very developed process for it. So it's very painful for me to write.
yeah,
Like I hate it until suddenly I love it. And that's kind of like how I'm not good at just generating like a first draft and accepting it that it's not going to be that great, and that refining the first draft
yeah.
is going to make it better. Like I try to basically write my final draft the first time around, and it's a very painful process. Um,
Is that how
I
you
think that
work, Jessica, as well? Is that how you actually you create your designs though as well?
no, I don't create my
Is there a
designs that way
parallel
at
between?
all. Like I definitely do a
No,
huge iterative, like, lots of iteration,
you
lots of
do.
brainstorming, lots of sketching, like I'm not like a one
That's
and done
interesting.
person with my art, but I don't know why I assume I should be that way with my writing. And
Writing.
but I think this was one of the things that I have noticed when reading other people's manuscripts that are writing children's books and things like that. This is where I feel really
Mm,
good that I waited to have kids to be a writer, because I didn't have a lot of exposure to little kids. I never babysat and all that kind of stuff. Like the first time I ever held a baby was like when I brought my own baby home from the hospital, which is like so crazy.
we
But no, I swear. Because I mean, I have a little brother, but he's only a year and a half younger than me. So we were like basically the same
okay.
age growing up. And I had
Yeah,
younger cousins, but they were like, they didn't live
yeah,
close to us, so I didn't hang out with them. And so,
yeah.
but when I read manuscripts by people who don't spend time with children, I can tell, because like
Yeah.
the manuscripts will be too complicated, or like certain pages will like be too wordy, and I'll be like, man, you lost the kid here. This is where the kid dropped off. This is where you need a page turn, like whatever, because I just got so used to reading books with the kids that I kind of had a more intuitive sense of like, oh, we need to break the page here and illustrate this thing here, because if not, a kid's attention span is just going to drift off into the clouds. And so I think now I've always been like a relatively empathetic person, and like that's how I design, is like I
Mm,
visualize the people that I'm designing for, and that visualization is like, and having an audience for my work is how I'm able to make my work. And so with writing,
mm,
it's sort of the same thing. Like I have to like really get in the head of a person reading this, be that a parent or the kid listening, and be like, what do they
mm,
want out of this experience? As a parent, there's some books that you have where they're able to be like really funny and tell like these little visual jokes or even verbal jokes, and you can read it over and over again and it continues to be like entertaining and funny. And then there's some that you read where the joke is like too heavy-handed, and it's just like you're just saying that joke again and again and again every time that you reread this book, and it just makes it so unfunny and unpleasant. And so it's sort of finding this balance in your writing, where you know that this is not just a person doesn't read this book one time and put it down and never picks it up again.
yeah.
It is a thing that you read again and again and again. And that makes you write things a little bit differently. You have to understand that everything that you have in the book has to be something that can be repeated and won't get old if possible. And then also, too, like,
Mm,
you have to think about read alouds when it comes to children's books, where there's going to be times when kids can't really see the illustrations as well. So the words have to be quite visual too. And so you try to just pack as much in as little as possible. It's really a huge exercise in editing, writing for children, where you're
Say
trying to
so,
just
yeah.
pack such a crazy punch into just a few words, to the point where even a sentence can create like a whole visual for someone. And then if you think about it
Yeah.
as the fact that most children's book authors are not also illustrating their books, right? Like, it's quite rare
Yeah.
where you have like an author illustrator. The usual thing is that there's a separate author and a separate illustrator. As an
Yeah.
author, you have to build in the prompts for your illustrator. And so you can think of that even
Okay.
as the author illustrator, where you're writing for your illustrator self to be able to pick up the seeds of what you have written and expand upon them with the illustration. So it's like you sort of have to pretend like you're in this partnership with these two sides of yourself, and you want to help your
Yeah, I was
illustrator
gonna
self
say,
out. Yeah, totally. You want to help your
it's
illustrator
kinda
self out by laying down the tracks for them to pick it up.
yeah. I was gonna delve a little bit deeper into that whole kind of process of, did you see a visual of the story before you saw the narrative? Because it's kinda like a rock band. Someone who sees the lyrics and someone sees the melody, you're kinda jamming in real time. You're kind of like, this is a groove. So did those 2 go in harmony? Were they running asynchronously to the process? Were you sketching ideas down? I'm really keen to
Yeah,
understand a little bit
yeah.
more around the
I think
process.
it wasn't necessarily that I was doing sketches while writing, but as I was
Mm,
writing, I would come up with like a visual metaphor that would work for that thing that I was writing, and come up with a few of them, and then think about, in terms of the pace of the book, like which one is going to work the best to get us to the next part. Or like, I'm not
mm,
going to have 2 pages about space or 2 pages about whatever, like you want to have enough variety. And so it's sort of like for every spread or page or, little bit of prose that you have, you write down like the 2 or 3
yeah,
ways you could see it going. And then each one of those things has its different directions. And then in the end, you like
mm,
highlight or circle or whatever, or edit down to the thing that you think is going to contribute best to the whole based on all the other ideas that have shown up, versus falling in love with
sure.
like this one thing for this one part, which suddenly has a cascading effect down the line on other parts of the book.
Yeah, it's an interesting process when you hear it, when you're sort of laying it out there. What was the biggest challenge for you when you were creating these books? You
The
mentioned about running out of steam and you said you were gonna do it independent, but then when you suddenly have publisher breathing down your neck saying, "Hey."
Yeah, there were a few pain points. The getting done with the manuscript part is the hardest for me, for sure. Like actually
Yeah.
getting the manuscript to a good finalized place. Part of that is because, you know, you're working with an editor like as well, and they end up like having really strong opinions about certain things in it, and you can fight them on that, but they also like have a lot of experience and you also should probably like take a knee sometimes and let them get their way. But it was really tough with a couple of the books that I've written, because I felt like I had more visual language in the manuscripts, and it got kind of edited
Mm,
away and then felt quite bare bones when it was like down to its final
yeah.
manuscript. But then, you have to just remember that you can build that out with the illustration. So yeah, I mean, the writing is definitely the hardest hurdle for me. It's a thing that I don't have. Like with my illustration, I know the process. I know it's just like read
Mm,
the material, write down ideas based on the material, respond to those ideas with visual thumbnails or whatever ideas, develop those further into sketches, get the sketches approved, work on the finals, etc. I have this really like concrete process for moving through. And
yeah.
with the writing, I feel like I'm just always second guessing myself, or like I'll write something and think it's really good, and then someone else will think it's really cheesy. But the thing is, it's like there's things that you'll hear about writing kids books that are true a lot of times and completely false other times. Like when I was doing Tomorrow I'll Be Brave and Tomorrow I'll Be Kind, there was like all of the publishers were talking about, oh, well, rhyming books don't sell anymore, like nobody wants to do rhyming books or whatever. And which is just not true. Like every time that you find
That's
like
not true.
your
Yeah.
like some aunt or uncle like gets a kid's book for your kids, it's always a rhyming book. And so I think it's like
Yeah. They love it.
sometimes publishers and people within the book world are paying attention to what people within the book world are saying and not necessarily what customers are saying all the
Yeah.
time. And that's not to say that
I can
that's like
imagine.
100% true, but I just feel like you know how it is. It's like graphic designers talking to other graphic designers about things they care about is totally different than if you talk to a random person in the world about that same topic. Like that a random person in the world doesn't actually care at all about the thing that you're so heated about. And
Yeah.
so or has like
Like an
a
A&R person.
yeah, yeah, or like, you know, like this is why people still get butterfly tattoos. You know, like people have butterflies, the end. Like it's like you can say that that's going to stop, but it's not going to stop because like people just love butterflies, hummingbirds, whatever. You know, like there's things that regular people love and we shouldn't shame them for it. We should embrace it and
Mm,
fold it into our work, you know? And I think regular people
yeah.
love rhyming books. And so if you can write a good rhyming book, it's going to sell.
Yeah. Who do you think is kind of doing it well? Like, who are you looking at kind of saying, well, they've got a really nice style? Like, are you able to compare your work? Because it seems to have a unique place amongst our, like, we've got a ridiculous amount of kids' books. Folks, for our listeners of the podcast, Adrienne Tan, who was part of this at HC a long time ago, she gave us maybe 400 or 500 books when her first child was born. So we've probably got 1,000 or 2,000 children's books floating in this house. But it does hold its own. It doesn't really sit amongst anyone else. Like it's close to the Julia
Well,
Donaldson books. I know that.
part of it is that no one's making lettering books or like books where lettering is a focus because they're impossible to
Mm,
internationalize. So like it's tough to sell through a book because you know you're
okay.
limited to whatever language that book was created in unless you completely recreate all of the artwork. And so that's been sort of the case with Tomorrow Be
Ah,
Brave and Kind, where like another person who writes a children's book that is just all pictorial and narrative,
the
you
Gruffalo, for instance. Yeah.
yeah, you typically will just like the story will be printed in black ink. They can just not print that plate for like a huge run of books
Of
and then
course.
switch just that plate and swap out the languages in like dozens of different languages. But when the artwork
Mm,
itself is language, it's very you're limiting yourself into the audience that it can find. And
yeah.
people ask me all the time like, oh, is this available in French, or when are you going to do this in Portuguese or whatever? And I'm like, when some publisher
Yeah.
wants to do it and wants me to redo all the artwork, basically. So I think
Yeah.
that's one of the
How
reasons
would that
why
work
there's
though,
not a
Jessica?
ton. What were you saying?
How would that work in terms of timing? Like how long did it take you to create this book? So if you had to create them in different languages,
Well, you
presumably it
know,
would take you this probably a similar
it
amount.
wouldn't take me the same amount of time because a lot of the artwork creation is sort of in the like figuring it out stage. And once it's figured out and it's just
Mm,
about recreating it in another word, you're not even recreating all of the artwork, you're just recreating that one part. And so I've already
yeah.
translated Tomorrow I'll Be Brave into German and French. And so
Okay.
and that's just because like publishers within those languages will approach Penguin and say, hey, we want the rights to publish this in Germany. And then we work out a thing where they
Uh,
pay me for my time to like redo the spreads that need to get redone. But people are always mad at me. They're like, how come you didn't do it in Spanish first? And I was like, it's not on me. I'm not the one choosing to publish these books. But yeah, no, they take a few weeks to redo. But the process of actually creating them takes quite a bit longer. I think like start to
sure.
finish, Tomorrow I'll Be Brave was something like 400 hours, and Tomorrow I'll Be Kind was like 600.
Really?
Yeah, quite a
That's not that
bit.
bad.
It's not that bad, but it's
I was
like
gonna say that's not that.
you're not doing it in a straight shot though. You're doing it like 2
Okay.
weeks of intense work and then you send off the manuscript and it gets rewrite and then it comes back to you and you redo that or whatever. So it's all these like really intense pockets of time and then it
Yeah.
like is a big gap between when you send off the work and get the next round of feedback. So it's like 2 weeks of intensity, 3 weeks of nothing. 2 weeks of intensity, 3 weeks of nothing.
Mm,
And that's kind of like the process for working
the
with a
cadence.
publisher.
Here's a question for you, and you can dodge it if you want, because in case your publisher is listening. it's one thing if the publisher maybe gives you critique on the words, but did you ever encounter critique on the illustrations?
Yeah, but usually
And
if
how
they
was that
gave me
handled?
critiques on the illustrations, it was like a misunderstanding about something in it. Where in
Okay.
one of my
Because that's
books,
kind of your domain. Like that's,
yeah. I mean, I'm very lucky because I can usually be like, I don't want to do that. And then the publishers are like, okay, like not everybody has that power. But I do try to
yeah.
always like listen to everyone with an open heart and try to get to the why they want a change to happen.
And then tell them they're
Um,
wrong.
yeah, and then I tell them they're wrong. No, it's if like on my recent book, there's always a ton of changes that they want to happen in the art, but usually
Yeah.
a couple of them that I'm like, I don't want to do that. I have a reason of why don't want to do it, and I go, I know that that makes sense, but and then I just kind of have a little back and forth with them, and they're like, okay, we're good either way. We didn't really feel that strongly about it. And so yeah, I mean, I get feedback. One of the things that I got for my third book, which is Who Will You Be, was they just wanted to make sure that it had enough diversity represented in like the people pictured. But I would be
Mm,
like, oh yeah, that person is Asian. Oh yeah, that's meant to be like an African American mom and her child or whatever. And like as soon as I said it, they were like, oh, we
yeah.
see it now. And I'm like, okay. And I was like, I don't want to get too like stereotypical with how people look or whatever. I want it to be like a suggestion that it is that. But you don't want to be hitting people over the head with stereotypes when you're trying to uh, visualize a kind of
Yeah.
person.
There was a post that you put out on Instagram, which kind of triggered me to reach out to you because we were back and forth about some stuff, but um, the sort of reliance on social media to promote your work, like we're all kind of crafts people at the end of the day. We're designers. You've a huge following. For anyone who's on Instagram, check out Jessica's following because they've got some seriously cool stuff going on at the moment, opening up a shop and so forth in Oakland. But you mentioned about the first book sold really well. I mean, I saw it. Like, I think I might have seen it on your Instagram. I think that's more than likely because I'm not on Facebook. But then the second book was published, and didn't have the same sort of visibility.
It was the
Are
third
you
book.
okay to talk?
So yeah,
Or the third book was it was Be Kind and Grateful?
my first two books did really well. So like my first book, I just, went so hard on promoting it because it was my very first kids book. But my second book,
Yeah,
I felt like I was doing sort of like more normal promotion for it, like nothing over the top, not phoning in all of my favors or whatever. And that one still did really well. Like it did better than the first in
yeah,
pre-sales. And then when the third book came out, I sort of followed the same formula that I did for the second book, which was to like post about it when there was the cover reveal and post several times about the fact that it was coming out and announce a book tour and like do all the things that I had done. But I just found it impossible to get eyes on my social media posts. And just to give you an idea of
yeah.
how different um, it has been for that third book versus my first and second. So my first and second books in pre-order and week of sale. So it's like pre-orders are everything that happens from when you announce it up until the day of sale. And then the first week of sale gets lumped into your pre-order numbers as well. My
Hmm.
first book sold like 2,500 copies in pre-order to first week of sale, and the second one was 2,700 copies. And then the third one sold 750 copies, and it came out
Right.
a year almost a year ago because it came out I think in April of this past year. And since being on sale, it has only sold 1,700 copies total. And that includes me bulk buying it like 200 copies at a time to sell them in my store and things like that. And so by the time we
What?
got to like a year out on my other books, they had sold like 30,000 copies or like, like a really pretty
Yeah,
significant
it did really
amount. And
well.
then it kept going and going. So it sold 1,000 less than I sold in pre-order for my other books. And it's because every time I talk about it, people are like, I didn't know this book came out, and they
Yeah,
like make a
me.
big thing of like not ever hearing about it. Yeah, exactly. And so I
Yeah,
think what happened was it came out right when Instagram was doing a big shift about reels and what kind of content they wanted to promote to other people. I
Yeah.
think they've since course corrected it a little bit because I just announced my new book that's coming out in October, and I feel like I'm getting plenty of eyes on it, and plenty of people are like being really responsive to it, and it's not like I feel like I set up a new Instagram account for it and it already has 1,000 followers. I feel like there's like people are seeing it. Whereas with the third book, like no one saw it. I have 200,000 followers, and the posts that I would make about the book would get like 400 likes or like be seen by, less than 3% of my followers or something like that. And it was just because at the time they were really pushing video content. And so I'm hoping that things have like sort of corrected a little bit in that regard. I'm still going to definitely be trying to do more like video content-y stuff about it just to make sure that I can get eyeballs on it. But yeah, I mean, it was really destabilizing because I felt like I had this thing that was really reliable for getting eyes on the things that I made. And then it just felt like it evaporated overnight, like the ability to trust in it. And so, and it's made me really reconsider social media in general. Like, not that I'm not the first person
Yeah.
to be like, social media is not all the way healthy for us. Like everybody thinks that and knows that. But I'm actually writing a talk right now because I'm doing a few public speaking things in the next few months. And it's going to be really about like embracing IRL and trying to have real human connections to people
Yeah.
rather than relying on social media to make those connections for you. Because I think we all got
Completely.
into this like idea that I'm sharing the things that I'm doing on social media and my friends follow me. Therefore, my friends see it. Therefore, I don't feel like I should go and reach out to
No.
them separately and tell them about my life or connect with them. So, because you're like, oh,
Yeah.
that's just like me doubling up on that. When really, like, there's no guarantee that anybody that follows you sees things. And so it's actually made us
100%.
less likely to reach out to people and make the actual in-person connections because we just assume that they know about the thing already. And so I really
Yeah.
want to sort of like highlight this behavior and how I think the
Risky it is.
pandemic, yeah, like the pandemic has made us all feel very disconnected and like isolated and everything. And, things are like open up now and everything. But I feel like like that disconnection is still very real. And part of it is people aren't doing the extra step of like connecting one-on-one with people or in groups with people or
Yeah.
trying to like manifest these more real life connections as much because we've just used these online ones as our only source of socializing for so long, even before the pandemic.
Totally. On that point, I remember many, many years ago, I worked for MySpace. And in Sydney, the international HQ was in Sydney. And we were working with brands that were doing millions of dollars to build out their friends list, getting the top six. Do you remember that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And whenever MySpace started to die, I remember walking away kind of going, all those brands have spent millions and millions of dollars, and it's just down the toilet. So from that moment on, I always encourage people to build their newsletter list to have that kind of connection directly with the customer. So with Instagram at the moment, you've got 200,000. I saw that happen the other day, and it's a great milestone. But if people want to stay in touch with what you're doing, is newsletter still the best way for them to engage with you?
It's
Is that
definitely a
something
good
that you
way.
still believe?
I love my newsletter because I don't send it out often. It takes me so long to write it that I only do it like every couple of
Yeah,
months. But I do feel like while I share often on social media, the newsletter I feel like is the way that I can like guarantee that the people who care about my stuff see my stuff, you know? So I don't share everything
same.
in my newsletter that I've posted on Instagram because I don't want it to be like a big look at me festival every time I send a newsletter. And I
Yeah,
tend to write about super random things too, like doing karate with my son and all that kind of stuff, because I feel like I treat it more like we're pen pals, you know? Like, I love it when people write me
yeah,
back. Like, when I send out my newsletter and then people write me back and tell me about their life, it's like so fun for me. It's like the thing that makes me want to send the newsletter out, because then I just get a bunch of like fun email instead of like annoying email of just people being like, that was
Yeah.
so great. I feel so happy now. Also, I'm doing roller skating too. Like it's wonderful. I love it. And so you kind of have to do both, like, follow me on the
Yeah.
internets. And then also the newsletter is really fun. I promise I'm very not spammy. I send them out so
You're not at all.
occasionally. Yeah.
You're not at all. Like I've been on the newsletter. I think I'm still on it as I'm saying this. I'm like, God, if they check that
You
I'm
might
not on
want
the
to
newsletter,
you
it's
might
going
want
to
to
sound like
re-sign up, because I just switched from MailChimp and some people are telling me they haven't received it.
who did
So
you move to? Just an interest. I moved from
Mailer
MailChimp about
Lite.
18 months.
So I
How are
moved to
they?
Mailer Lite. I was between them and Ghost, and they were pretty similar price for me, because like
Mm,
I didn't do Substack. They were trying to
yeah,
court me like a long time ago, and I didn't do it because they had this crazy high expectation of like how many emails they wanted you to send out, and I was like, I don't want
you
to do
were
that.
down. Yeah,
And then they've just hit a bunch of controversy with their free speech stuff. So I'm just like, I also don't think like
yeah,
it's probably going to fold at some point, just because you can't be supporting like massive like
yeah.
email lists for free forever. So I don't know.
100%. Well, that's what Mailchimp did. They
Yeah.
gave you was it 1,000 subscribers for free, and
Yeah.
then
Well,
they
my
just hit you
MailChimp,
with massive.
because I had 16,000 subscribers, because that's how many I have. MailChimp was
Yeah,
$330 a month, which like for someone
it's
that sends
crazy.
out like 4 emails a year, it was really hard to justify like,
That's crazy.
$1,000 an email, so, but
Yeah, that is crazy. So MailerLite is
MailerLite is
I've
ended up
I've
being
checked them
about
out.
125 a month, and it is very similar for
Yeah,
me. Like Ghost is the other one that a lot of people have been using, but it's probably like more rich than
yeah,
I need. I don't really need something that has all
yeah.
of those features. I just need something that is like a nicely designed email newsletter, and that's kind of that, and has good metrics, and that's it.
Did you check out ConvertKit? Just an interest.
Someone had recommended ConvertKit to me too. I did MailerLite because my friend Dan Cederholm always talked about it as
Yeah,
being
yeah.
really great, and I know a few other people that use it that like it.
Seem a lot of American people I know use MailerLite. A lot of European people are using ConvertKit. It's kind of like it's just interesting. But yeah, MailerLite they're all pretty much the same thing. But sorry to deviate a little bit on that. Well, look, Jessica, I know it's coming towards the end of your lunchtime, and I know you have not had your lunch, and I want to let
I
you
know.
go.
I have
I wish you the
my bag of grapes, but that's it.
your bag of grapes. I feel like your mum here, but you need to be eating more than just grapes for your lunch, Jessica.
I know, I will. I have soup over here somewhere
You,
that I'll have. Soup and grapes.
ah, good, good, good. Get a good lunch into you. But I wish you the very best of luck with the new book. I have just bought the last two books from you on your website. So when you turn on your Do Not Disturb, you'll see two little pings. My kids will be getting them in the next couple of weeks, but
Oh,
hopefully by
yay.
the time I do the intro for this podcast, I'll be able to have them on the desk and show them to the listeners. So we
Oh
mentioned
yeah, and
there
if I
about your
if I
newsletter.
can if I can hard sell your listeners on pre-ordering my new book, it's called My First Book of Fancy Letters. And don't wait to buy it
Ooh,
from me directly. Like, please pre-order it, because the pre-order
yeah,
numbers really make a difference to the publisher and like to
really?
how they treat the book moving forward. So it's on Amazon, and it's on a bunch of other, like if you just Google like My First Book of Fancy Letters and then my last name, it'll turn up the Penguin page for it, and they link out to bookshop.org and a bunch of other places.
Is that the one? Who'll you be?
No, that
Is
one
that
is
the name of the
out. You
book?
can buy that one now, and that will show up whenever it shows up. The new one is called My First Book of
It says
Fancy
coming
Letters.
soon on your website, though.
I
It says
have to
coming
update
soon on the
that.
website.
I just put it on
Come
there the other.
on.
I know. I just put it on there the other day. Oh, wait, does it say coming soon on my shop? That just means that it's sold out right now and I have to
Yeah.
update the numbers. Yeah. So
Oh,
don't
okay.
you
So
can buy
what's
them anywhere though.
the
You
new
don't have
book
to
that you're
buy it from me.
No, I
So
always like buying directly from the
it,
authors and
in
the
terms of
illustrators.
pre-orders though, don't buy it from me. For pre-orders for
Amazon.
new books, any other bookstore, go to your local favorite bookstore and have them pre-order it for you. It's better to do that, because if you pre-order from me, my numbers don't count towards my sale,
Okay.
that the big sale
Ah,
stuff, and
very
that's
good.
what determines what if the publisher likes me or not. So
So give a shout out for the new book. What's the new book title called?
the new book is called My First Book of Fancy Letters.
Very nice. I'll put a link to that. I'll find a link to a couple of stores in Europe and a couple of stores in America. Try and avoid the Amazon thing if we can, if that's
Yes,
okay,
yeah,
Jessica.
totally.
Put it, yeah, put a link to your local stores. But if you are in Australia, there's definitely a bunch in Sydney I know that I recommend to go in and pre-order the books, as Jess has just explained. Look, Jessica, thank you so much for giving me your time today, my night time. Thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you. And if you need anything else in the future, you know where we're at.
Yeah, thank you so much.